years in, is Nigeria's economic playbook delivering real progress or just buying time before the next reset? Good morning and welcome to another power-packed episode of Business Week. The global economy is in beast mode and not the good kind. China just froze US LNG imports, while Trump's backpedal on further tariff hikes after mystery messages from Beijing has markets asking truce or trade trap. OPEC trims demand forecast for oil, and Nigeria's crypto crowd is calling for a referee after CBEC's dramatic collapse. Meanwhile, Access Holdings should be popping champagne with a record 867 billion profit, and NNPC's new boss has his eyes on a $60 billion investment trophy by 2030. And if all that wasn't enough action for one Saturday, today's deep dive is your halftime report on Nigeria's economic reset almost 2 years into Tinubu's administration. Well, if you missed all the big business and market stories of the week, fret not, I've got you covered. I'm Rolake Akinkubefilan. As always, we're starting with a look at global energy commodities. And of course, it's the Easter bank holiday weekend. Markets didn't trade on Friday, but they did trade on Thursday, the last trading day of the working week. And Brent has been rebounding. It was up day on day, this time by 6.5% to close Thursday's trading spell at $67.85 per barrel. We're seeing Trump gunning for Iran here, imposing tighter restrictions and sanctions on Iranian oil, which has helped to support prices. And of course, there's now talk of a truce around the global trade wars, but perhaps don't hold your breath too much. Nevertheless, markets responding fairly positively to that. Brent on the rebound, WTI followed. Also on the rebound on Thursday trading, close of business. Natural gas, not so much, down by 6.36%, but RBOB gasoline, no surprises there, trailing Brent, and WTI was also rebounding at 6.63%. Let's take a look at equities markets. The all-share index also ended Thursday trading on a positive note to close at 104,233.61 points. Over 11,000 deals consummated, volume of shares not so bad, 376 million shares traded, value of 7.9 billion, and stock market capitalization at 65.49 trillion naira. Let's take a look at Africa, my Africa. Joburg closed the week positive, as did Accra, Nairobi, and Casablanca. Special mention there to Casablanca, closing the week on a major high, probably a month-long high, 17,175.48 points. Now to Europe. It was a mixed picture. London FTSE was flat. No response there from markets. Close of trading on Thursday. Eurostock 600 was down by 0.1%. Germany, Paris, and Spain were also down. Top picks from around the world. The first story here is that OPEC, the oil cartel, has lowered, no surprises, its oil demand forecast for 2025 and 2026. Of course, concerns around the unfolding global trade war, if you can call it that. OPEC revised the growth in oil demand down to 1.3 million barrels a day. That's the growth in demand, not the actual demand levels, from its previous forecast of about 1.4 million barrels a day, citing concerns, of course, around all the tariff brouhaha going on. But what is also important to note is that the OPEC members have started to release some barrels back on the market. If you recall, in 2024, they had a deal around holding back supplies to support prices, and amidst concerns around global demand forecasts. So the combination of that and some of the concerns around trade probably might create a further downward impact on prices as the year unfolds, but we'll see how that goes, right? Because these days it's hard to pinpoint oil prices to one single market driver. Next, Kenya is lifting a ban on new commercial banking license. Now, this is a ban that has been in place since November 2015. So almost 10 years in force, Kenya's central bank had this bank on new banking license. And this was primarily driven by the collapse of two banks some years ago in Kenya, Imperial Bank and Dubai Kenyan Bank. And there were concerns raised around risk management and regulations and operations of the banking sector. And in fact, the number of banks in Kenya had shrunk from about 44 banks to 38 banks in the last 7 to 8 years as the regulator was pushing for further consolidation in industry. Now, Kenya is lifting that freeze on new licenses, and that lifting will come into force on the 1st of July 2025. We expect to see further M&A activity in that. There are new other operators from across the African continent eyeing the Kenya financial services sector. Of course, Kenya has a very strong fintech and digital banking platform. China has halted U.S. LNG imports. The China-U.S. saga. It is really about China and U.S. if you think about it. It's not really about the rest of us. But China, up until recently, was importing around 4.1 million metric tons of LNG from the U.S. into the Chinese market. Its other big LNG trade partners are Australia, Qatar, and I think Russia. Yes, Russia is a big gas partner, trading partner for China. That means China is essentially halting about $2.4 billion worth of LNG imports into the Chinese market for the U.S. In 2021, the U.S. used to account for around 11% of China's gas LNG imports. That has come down to about 6%, and that will continue. Now, this could have major implications for U.S. LNG traders who have obviously long-term contracts with the Chinese market. Key question is whether those long-term contracts will now not be honored on the back of this ban, because those contracts are usually commercial and contractual agreements. But again, the trade war is having an impact on the global energy landscape. This is a story I'm personally very vested in, and I will certainly be monitoring on Business Week. Now, Google faces a $6.6 billion class action lawsuit in the UK over allegations of market abuse around its search function. Now, the allegations center around the fact that Google was colluding with phone manufacturers, Android operators, to pre-install its Google Search and Google Chrome services on mobiles. Same thing with Apple. And now the regulator, the consumer regulator, market regulator, has said this is illegal. It constitutes sort of antitrust behavior and all of that kind of stuff. So Google is facing a $6.6 billion lawsuit, class action lawsuit in the UK. Now, Google argues that that's not the case. Consumers just prefer its search engine functions. But I guess we can leave that to the courts to decide. And finally, African private capital fundraising doubled in 2024. So it's never all really bad news and negative news, really. $4 billion worth of fundraising, and the bulk of that went into two asset classes, infrastructure and private equity. So both of them accounting for 30% of the fundraising. And the major contributors here were development finance institutions, who contributed about 42% of that total pot, investing in infrastructure and private equity through those structures. So this is a great thing for the continent, especially given that a lot of the narrative is around the fact that capital is scarce, but we're seeing a doubling of fundraising in 2024. Hopefully that trend continues exponentially. That's it for my top picks from around the world. So in other news from around the world, we'll start, of course, with Donald Trump, who stated that Beijing had repeatedly attempted to mediate a settlement and that he was hesitant to keep raising tariffs on China because doing so might halve trade between the two nations. Now, speaking to reporters in the Oval Office on Thursday, Trump claimed that representatives he thought represented Chinese leader Xi Jinping had attempted to initiate negotiations. However, he consistently avoided answering direct questions about whether he and Xi had direct communication. On Thursday, Trump also stated that he was hesitant to continue the increasing levies and hinted that he would be amenable to reducing them. Well, he also insisted that the tariffs will continue to apply to phones, computers, and other high-end consumer electronics, calling the previous weekend an exception and only a formality in his larger attempt to change U.S. trade policy. When it was disclosed this past weekend that the U.S. had exempted computers, smartphones, and other consumer goods from tariffs, Trump and his top advisors caused uncertainty when he asserted in a lengthy Sunday social media post that there was no exception for certain products. He further put a lot of speculation into the market. Now to other news in Africa. Elon Musk's Starlink has been given a license by Lesotho in southern Africa to run a satellite network and offer satellite internet services, the nation's communications regulator announced early this past week. The regulator said the landmark decision to grant a license to Starlink marked a significant step forward in the country's digital transformation, and that it underscored the authority's unwavering commitment to enabling a competitive, transparent, and forward-looking communication sector that fuels economic growth and fosters innovation. Urgent calls for more stringent government regulation and enforcement in Nigeria have been rekindled by the recent collapse of the digital asset trading platform CBEX or CBEX. The abrupt failure of the site, which prevented investors from accessing their money, resulted in losses of over 2.4 billion naira and highlighted serious weaknesses in Nigeria's laws governing online investments. Nigeria urgently needs to fortify its regulatory environment for trading digital assets as the CBEX fiasco makes clear. That's according to a group of consumers protecting online investments. The call for better safeguarding of investments and improving public financial awareness. For the second time in less than a week, the Dangote refinery has further reduced the ex-depot price of premium motor spirit, also referred to as gasoline, to 835 naira per litre. With this most recent adjustment, the price has dropped by 30 naira from the previous rate of 865 naira per litre, which was established 6 days ago, and by a total of 45 naira from the prior price of 880 naira per litre, which was recorded at the beginning of the previous week. The updated pricing will be implemented across all partner retail locations. That's according to a statement released on Wednesday by Anthony Chiejina, Chief Branding and Comms Officer of Dangote Group. In a meeting with the company's employees, Mr. Bayo Ojulari, the recently appointed Group Chief Executive Officer of NNPC Limited, promised to carry out the company's ambitious plans and make NNPCL a source of pride for all Nigerians. According to Ojulari, who unveiled his agenda, the NNPCL, under his leadership, seeks to increase crude oil production in Nigeria to over 2 million barrels per day, sustained through 2027, and also reach 3 million barrels a day by 2030. He's also looking at increasing refining output to 200,000 barrels a day by 2027 and 500,000 barrels a day by 2030. He also wants to increase gas production to 10 billion cubic feet per day by 2027 and 12 billion cubic feet per day by 2030, as well as improve energy access and affordability for all Nigerians. Well, we wish him the very best. Now, in its 2024 full-year audited financial statements, Access Holdings PLC reported a pre-tax profit of 867.01 billion naira, up from 729 billion naira the previous year. In addition, the bank holding firm, the holding company, announced a sharp increase in gross earnings, which went from 2.5 trillion naira to 4.9 trillion naira from the previous year. The profit after tax was 642.2 billion naira, up 3.7% from the 619.3 billion naira reported for the previous year. PricewaterhouseCoopers PwC has announced the closure of its operations in 9 sub-Saharan African countries, citing the outcome of a strategic review aimed at streamlining its global network. The affected countries include Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, Cameroon, Madagascar, Senegal, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as the Republic of Congo and the Republic of Guinea and Equatorial Guinea. The move marks a significant pullback by the global professional services firm in the region. Well, that's it for our top stories for now.